Have you ever wondered why Russia invaded Ukraine? The answer might not be what you think. It's not just about territorial disputes or power struggles. There's a far deeper strategic motive at play. In this video, we'll uncover the real reason behind Russia's war in Ukraine, exploring how economic pressures, global energy shifts, and resource ambitions have driven Putin to make such a bold and dangerous move. Stick around, because this isn't just another story of conflict. It's the story of a nation's survival strategy in an ever-changing world. Ideology. This is plausible. Putin hinted at these ideological trends in 2005 by calling the Soviet Union's disintegration one of the worst tragedies of the 20th century. 2 years later, Putin surprised world leaders in Munich with a lengthy tirade against the post-Cold War international order, claiming it was built by a U.S. that wanted to rule the globe. He called this poisonous, showing that Russia did not wish to cooperate with this world order. In the Bucharest Declaration the following year, NATO decided to include Ukraine and Georgia. No particular schedules or roadmaps were set, and this was a compromise between the U.S., which wanted to enter both countries, and France and Germany, which thought Russia would be offended. Putin was in Bucharest and lobbied NATO leaders to deny the two countries' membership. These factors pose the question: did Putin attack Ukraine in February 2022 to prevent NATO membership, as many believe? After the Bucharest Declaration, Putin's actions suggest this. Just months after its publication, he used force where words failed. Russia invaded Georgia using NATO rules. The alliance does not accept territorial disputes. Putin's invasion of Georgia, which created the generally unrecognized alliance-backed enclaves of Abkhazia and South Ossetia, ensured that NATO would oppose Georgia's entrance due to territorial disputes. Meanwhile, Ukraine was led by incompetent or pro-Russian officials who were unlikely to join NATO, but the people were unhappy. After then-President Viktor Yanukovych rejected an EU-oriented accord, Ukrainians revolted in November 2013. He preferred a deal that would improve Ukraine's economic relations with Russia, since Russia produces little outside oil and natural gas. Ukrainians understandably disliked this. Remember this for later relevance. The February 2014 Revolution of Dignity overthrew Yanukovych's pro-Russia regime, capping Euromaidan protests. Putin encouraged separatists in Ukraine's eastern Donbass region, which has many ethnic Russians and Russian speakers, following his 2008 strategy. Separatists founded the unrecognized Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics with Moscow's help. Putin organized his Little Green Men and grabbed Crimea, justifying it with a bogus vote. Putin did not go further, and the 2015 Minsk agreements resulted in a broad ceasefire with intermittent combat. Minsk was acceptable, but unsatisfactory for the West. Putin considered the Minsk agreements successful. He seemed satisfied with the new status quo, laughing off the meager repercussions of the unrecognized Crimea takeover. Putin touted the annexation as his greatest foreign policy triumph. He strengthened his grip on the peninsula with new military outposts and a Kerch Strait bridge to Russia. He also did to Ukraine what he did to Georgia in 2008. He prevented Ukraine from joining NATO by inciting territorial and ethnic tensions. This suggests that NATO expansion and Kiev's possible membership were not the main reasons Putin invaded Ukraine in February 2022. Geopolitics. He disliked NATO's eastward expansion, and his demand that any peace terms for the present war include a guarantee that Ukraine never joined the alliance illustrates this. It does not address why Putin invaded Ukraine in 2022, 8 years after his original operation. NATO expansion seemed unlikely, so what else? The invasion appeared to be driven by Putin's revanchist ideology. His essay on the historical unity of Russians and Ukrainians was published in July 2021. He claimed in this document that Ukrainians and Russians were one people. He accused Ukraine's post-Maidan leadership of ignoring history and fostering neo-Nazism. This dossier helped the American intelligence community assess that Russia's large military buildup on the border that year was not an exercise, but likely an invasion. As 2021 ended, Putin promoted his revanchist worldview. He declared in December that the fall of the Soviet Union marked the end of the millennium-old Russia and a humanitarian disaster that separated 25 million ethnic Russians in the new post-Soviet governments from their country. These comments showed a goal beyond blocking Ukraine from joining NATO. Russia's foreign policy of acquiring naturally defensible borders was severely hampered by the fall of the Soviet Union. This is tough to achieve because Russia is on the widest European plain. Starting in the 16th century under Ivan the Terrible, it drove Russia's fast Eurasian expansion. Russia's influence peaked during the Cold War when the Soviet Union and its Warsaw Pact satellite republics reached the European plain and Central Asia. The Soviet Union's demise erased these geographical and geopolitical achievements. Thus, Russia had an undefended frontier from the Arctic and Baltic to the Black Sea on a vast plain. Cold War conditions were reversed. Putin invaded Ukraine partly to reclaim the shorter, easier-to-defend pre-1991 boundaries. This suggests a geopolitical reason for the invasion, along with an ideological one. Putin also mourned the Soviet Union's cultural dispersion in July and December 2021. Putin follows the civilization state model, which values historical, cultural, and linguistic linkages over national boundaries. He believed Ukraine's post-Maidan leadership was suppressing its past for this purpose. Putin certainly accepts his essay's ahistorical claims, despite most historians' disapproval. He saw the essay's claim that a Western-controlled Ukrainian government was suppressing Russian-speaking Ukrainians as intellectual justification to attack Ukraine. Even if Putin doesn't believe these assertions, they give him a nice justification to explain the attack to the Russian people and their suffering from sanctions and war deaths. Statistics Engine. Russia may have invaded Ukraine for demographic reasons. The International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for Putin in March 2023 for unlawfully deporting and transferring minors from Russian-occupied Ukraine. All ICC states must arrest him as soon as he enters their territory. Putin's population transfer may show the invasion's demographic rationale. According to the 1989 census, the Soviet Union had over 247 million people, the third largest in the world. After the USSR collapsed, Russia had 137.5 million people, fewer than half the total. In 2024, Russia has 144 million people, but a fertility rate of 1826 births per woman, significantly below replacement level. By the century's end, its population will shrink to 112 million. The average age is 40. This will rapidly increase in the future decades. Elder care will use more Russian resources and make military recruitment harder. Thus, forcing Ukrainian children and residents to leave can reverse Russia's demographic decrease and slow the average age. Putin's invasion may be about regaining Soviet territory as much as population. With just 1826 births per woman, Ukraine is declining like many post-Soviet countries. However, transferring Ukraine's youth can prolong Russia's troubles. Putin may assume it will afford him time to reverse Russia's population loss. All three interpretations have a major flaw. Putin may have invaded Ukraine in February 2022 for ideological, geopolitical, and demographic reasons, but they don't explain why. If these reasons were true, he would have had a stronger advantage if he invaded in 2014 when the crisis started. That year's events caught Ukraine's military off guard. Putin easily took Crimea. In 2022, then-German Chancellor Angela Merkel described the Minsk agreements as an attempt to buy time for Ukraine to develop its military after the Donbas War. This background and Russia's purported modernization efforts since 2014 gave the U.S. and its allies the assumption Ukraine would be unable to survive the Russian invasion. Ukraine outperformed Russia, while Russia underperformed. Merkel's strategy of incubating Ukraine's military worked. After the Minsk agreements, the Ukrainians acquired weaponry, training, and an intelligence relationship with the West, which devastated Russian forces on the battlefield. Ukraine's post-Maidan administration had time to strengthen and gain support from the Ukrainian people, who finally saw progress in strengthening links with the West they had wanted for so long. Many of these were untrue between 2014 and 2015. Ukraine's military and administration were disorganized. Putin gave Ukraine time to strengthen by delaying his attack until 2022. Russian mining goals in Ukraine. Putin's delay in invading Ukraine may have been influenced by the global economy's shift in the last decade, giving Russia time to stockpile foreign reserves. Despite Russia's vast resources, its economy is largely dependent on oil and gas, which accounted for 54% of exports and 45% of government revenue in 2021. However, climate change and the EU's push for carbon reduction are threatening Russia's reliance on fossil fuels. The EU aims for a 55% emission reduction by 2030 and carbon neutrality by 2050, driving the global shift to electric power. Electric car adoption illustrates this shift. Only 1% of cars were electric in 2017, but by 2023, the figure reached 18%. This transition poses an existential threat to Russia, whose oil-dependent economy faces increased competition from countries like Saudi Arabia, diversifying away from fossil fuels. Ukraine's mineral wealth, especially lithium, becomes critical in this context. Ukraine controls 10% of the world's lithium reserves, essential for electric vehicle batteries. The EU, aware of this, forged a strategic alliance with Ukraine in 2021. With Russia controlling Donetsk, a region rich in lithium, and possibly expanding further, it could gain leverage in Europe's energy transition. While tapping these resources could fund Russia's war efforts, Putin would need to rebuild the infrastructure destroyed by ongoing attacks. These riches would also deter Putin from giving up land in a military settlement. Russia's mineral ownership would also hinder private sector investment in Ukraine's post-war rehabilitation. The International Energy Agency predicts lithium demand will quadruple by the end of the decade and multiply by 10 by 2050. Russia wants Ukraine's minerals for another purpose. Bhaskaran said Russia still produces uranium, palladium, and nickel, which are essential for a decarbonized economy at the same rate as in 2021. Since the conflict, resource exploration has fallen 60–70%. Ukrainian exploration can help offset this shortage. Russia controls Ukraine's minerals, helping China. Putin's invasion forces Europe to buy lithium from China, at least temporarily. He can influence the EU's decarbonization targets and diminish demand for Russian fossil resources if he consolidates his victory. Russia is rich in these minerals, while Ukraine's lithium and rare earth reserves may be worth $311 trillion. This wealth may fund the fight. It would also deepen the strategic connection with China, which refines many of those minerals. Therefore, the Russo-Chinese axis might exert enormous leverage over Western countries and hinder decarbonization. Knowing that many Western officials value carbon neutrality, Russia and China might demand high rates for these products. Bloom stated that a free and democratic Ukraine with sovereignty over its internationally recognized boundaries is essential for a steady energy transition and a strong European battery sector. Bloom noted that Putin knew these minerals were available from Soviet times and attacked civilian infrastructure to empty the land of its population so these precious resources could be accessed without consequences. This approach includes Putin's eastern Ukraine deportations. Many experts say Putin's action was not prompted by Ukraine's natural resources, but the timing is impossible to deny. It's likely not accidental that Putin invaded when lithium and other decarbonization materials were in demand. Putin invaded for ideological, strategic, and maybe economic reasons. What do you think? Did Ukraine's lithium and rare earth minerals influence invasion timing? Comment your opinions below. Please like and subscribe for more expert military analysis.